Welcome to this episode of our series on The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith. In this series, we present the full text of Adam Smith's writing, preserving the core ideas without dilution. It's a comprehensive journey through the book. In today's video, we explore Book 1, Chapter 3, that the division of labor is limited by the extent of the market. Chapter 3 explains that the division of labor can only grow as much as the size of the market allows. Let's begin.
The division of labor does not exist in a vacuum. It depends on something deeper, the power of exchange, or more precisely, the extent to which we can trade with others. As it is the power of exchanging that gives occasion to the division of labor, so the extent of this division must always be limited by the extent of that power, or in other words, by the extent of the market. When markets are small, individuals cannot specialize because they would have no one to trade their surplus with. Imagine a talented shoemaker in a tiny village. If there's only demand for a few pairs of shoes, he can't make shoemaking his full-time job. There's simply no incentive.
Smith uses a clear example: a porter, or someone who carries goods for others. This is a job that only exists in large towns where there are enough people and goods moving around. A village is by much too narrow a sphere for him. Even an ordinary market town is scarce large enough to afford him constant occupation. In remote parts of the Scottish Highlands, there are no full-time specialists. Each farmer must do everything: butcher, baker, brewer. There isn't enough population or demand to support professionals like a dedicated carpenter or mason. In modern terms, think of a freelance graphic designer in a rural area with no internet. Without access to a larger connected market, say online clients, they'd likely have to work multiple odd jobs to survive.
In sparsely populated areas, tradespeople must take on multiple roles. A country carpenter doesn't just build furniture. He might also be a cabinet maker, wheelwright, and even wood carver. A country carpenter deals in every sort of work that is made of wood. A country smith in every sort of work that is made of iron. Specialization only becomes viable when there's a large enough demand for narrow services. For instance, Smith points out that a nail maker, or nailer, would be useless in the remote highlands. He might be able to make 300,000 nails a year, but the local demand might not even be 1,000. The lesson? Without a big enough market, division of labor becomes uneconomical.
Smith now turns to transportation and trade. What expands markets the most? Water carriage. In other words, rivers, seas, and oceans. As by means of water carriage, a more extensive market is open to every sort of industry than what land carriage alone can afford it. Consider this comparison. A broad-wheeled wagon with 2 men and 8 horses takes 6 weeks to carry 4 tons of goods from London to Edinburgh. A ship in the same time, with just 6 or 8 men, carries 200 tons. Smith writes, 6 or 8 men, therefore by the help of water carriage, can carry and bring back as 50 broad-wheeled wagons, attended by 100 men and drawn by 400 horses. Water, in effect, amplifies commerce.
Smith drives home the point with a global perspective. What goods could bear the expense of land carriage between London and Calcutta? He notes that without water routes, only extremely valuable goods could afford to be traded long distances, and even then, safety would be a serious concern. But thanks to maritime trade, goods flow easily between distant nations. London and Calcutta, separated by thousands of miles, still trade extensively. Each city offers a market to the other, encouraging mutual economic growth. In today's context, think about global e-commerce. Without global shipping lanes and container ships, there would be no Amazon, no international supply chains, no cheap electronics.
Smith notes a pattern in economic development. The first advances happen where water transport makes markets larger and more accessible. It is natural that the first improvements of art and industry should be made where this conveniency opens the whole world for a market. Remote inland areas develop later. Their markets are limited to nearby towns and villages, and their growth depends on how wealthy and populous those neighboring areas become. Smith gives the example of the early American colonies. Settlements always followed the seacoast or navigable rivers. They rarely expanded deep inland, because the further from water, the smaller the market.
Smith concludes the chapter with a historical observation. The nations that appear to have been first civilized were those that dwelt round the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. This wasn't an accident. The Mediterranean, with calm waters and close shores, was perfect for early navigation. People could sail without losing sight of land. Islands were abundant. Trade could flourish. Sailing beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the Straits of Gibraltar, was, for a long time, a rare and dangerous feat. Even the expert Phoenicians and Carthaginians hesitated. In essence, the geography of trade shaped the geography of civilization.
The earliest signs of civilization, according to well-established history, were found around the Mediterranean Sea. The nations that, according to the best authenticated history, appear to have been first civilized were those that dwelt round the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. This wasn't a coincidence. The Mediterranean is the world's largest inland sea, with no tides and gentle waves unless stirred by the wind. In ancient times, these features made it especially welcoming to early sailors. People lacked both the compass and the knowledge of advanced shipbuilding. So, venturing far from the coast or into rough ocean waters was extremely risky. The Mediterranean, with its smooth surface, nearby shores, and many islands, offered a safe training ground for navigation. To pass beyond the Pillars of Hercules was, in the ancient world, long considered as a most wonderful and dangerous exploit of navigation. The Pillars of Hercules refer to the Strait of Gibraltar. Even the most skilled sailors of antiquity, the Phoenicians and Carthaginians, were late to cross it. For a long time, they were the only ones who dared.
Among Mediterranean civilizations, Egypt stands out. Egypt seems to have been the first in which either agriculture or manufactures were cultivated and improved to any considerable degree. This advancement was made possible by the Nile River, especially in Lower Egypt, where the river split into multiple canals. These waterways connected towns, villages, and even many farmhouses, forming an early logistics network. Smith compares this to the modern-day Netherlands, where rivers like the Rhine and Maas serve a similar purpose, enabling fluid transportation and trade between cities and rural areas. The extent and easiness of this inland navigation was probably one of the principal causes of the early improvement of Egypt. Easy transport leads to larger markets, and larger markets support greater specialization, a core theme of this chapter.
Egypt wasn't alone. Smith also points to Bengal and eastern China, where agriculture and manufacturing also flourished very early. The improvements in agriculture and manufactures seem likewise to have been of very great antiquity in the provinces of Bengal and some of the eastern provinces of China. In Bengal, the Ganges and other rivers formed complex navigable canals, echoing the setup in Egypt. In China, several rivers and their branches interlinked to create a massive inland navigation system. An inland navigation much more extensive than that either of the Nile or the Ganges, or, perhaps, than both of them put together. But here's the key insight. Neither the ancient Egyptians, nor the Indians, nor the Chinese encouraged foreign commerce. Instead, they became rich through inland trade. These civilizations grew wealthy not by sailing abroad, but by connecting deeply within. This tells us something profound. Wealth doesn't always follow the sea. Sometimes it follows the river.
Now contrast that with other regions. All the inland parts of Africa and all that part of Asia, which lies any considerable way north of the Euxine and Caspian Seas. Smith points to areas like Scythia, Tartary, and Siberia, places that remained uncivilized for much of history. Why? The Sea of Tartary is actually a frozen ocean, impossible to navigate, and while large rivers do exist, they're often far apart, making it difficult to form reliable trade routes. Africa, too, lacks the deep inland seas that Europe and Asia enjoy. Unlike the Baltic, Adriatic, or Persian Gulf, African waterways don't penetrate far into the continent, and its major rivers, like the Niger and Congo, are too isolated to form a network. The great rivers of Africa are at too great a distance from one another to give occasion to any considerable inland navigation. In short, there's no connectivity, and without connectivity, markets stay small.
Smith ends with an important geopolitical observation. The commerce, which any nation can carry on by means of a river, which runs into another territory before it reaches the sea, can never be very considerable. Why? Because the lower country controls the outlet. This makes the upper country dependent and vulnerable. He offers a modern European example. The navigation of the Danube is of very little use to the different states of Bavaria, Austria, and Hungary. Even though the Danube is one of Europe's great rivers, it passes through multiple territories. None of these states can fully rely on it unless they control its full course to the sea, which they don't. In today's terms, imagine relying on a supply chain that runs through several unpredictable neighbors. You'd always be at risk of a bottleneck.
So what does all this tell us? Smith isn't just giving a history lesson. He's laying out a blueprint, a geographical explanation for why some nations advanced while others remain stagnant. Geography shapes markets, and markets shape civilization. Where there is smooth navigation, there is trade. Where there is trade, there is division of labor. And where there is division of labor, there is progress. This final section reinforces the chapter's central argument. The division of labor is limited by the extent of the market, and the extent of the market is often determined by something as simple and as powerful as a river.
In this episode, we've explored how rivers, seas, and inland navigation shaped early economic development across civilizations, from Egypt and China to the Mediterranean and beyond. Stay tuned for the next chapter in the Wealth of Nations series, where we explore the origin and use of money and how societies moved from barter to coinage. Don't forget to subscribe if you're enjoying these timeless economic insights, told calmly, clearly, and straight from the source.
Do you like to dig deeper? Political economy is full of powerful ideas. You're right in the thick of it. Insightful, thought-provoking, expanding every step of the way. From Adam Smith and the rise of capitalism to Marx's bold critique, mercantilism, Keynesian economics, neoliberalism, and more. Or we explore it all, clearly and from every angle. Keep the momentum going. Check the links, dive deeper, and subscribe for more.